Chapter 15. Ivy was very surprised to find out she had been disenrolled when she showed up for her final term at the Mackey School of Mines. There must be a mistake. She was nearly done with her degree. She was embarrassed to leave class in front of all her friends. Rader had returned from another unscheduled business trip with an announcement. You have enough education to do what we need to do. We're going back out to finish what we started 2 years ago. You and I are going to close up the house and get back on the road to Prospect. We leave in 2 days. Ivy was stunned. He hadn't mentioned a thing to her. It was time to play her ace. This was it. She was going to get free and take as much of their assets as she could with her. This was Reno, after all. She went to her lawyer's office to get her own will and separation recorded. She was shown into the office. Ivy felt sick when she saw Mr. Fink sitting where her sympathetic and tactful lawyer usually sat. He held up a copy of Ivy's will. I believe you left this with Mr. Nichols, but he is on vacation and asked me to handle his business for him in his absence. Fink and Rader had become very close friends over the last 2 years. Ivy was terrified. Rader must know everything. And without ceremony, Fink tore up her will in front of her face and threw a match in the metal wastebasket after it. I'm sure you will find everything in order, Mrs. Thompson. We've made a few changes which I am sure will be acceptable to you. And Ivy left without a word, her ace shot clean through. There really wasn't anything she could do unless she wanted to be pitched out and penniless, so she packed. She did not want to leave Reno. Rader and his cronies might be able to seize her accounts and investments, but they couldn't know about the find that she and Paul had made. She needed to get back there and file claims with the state. Making do had seemed like such a grand adventure at first, the excitement of the camps, the travel, but it had become a steely grind of making money. Any joy had long ago dissolved into the weariness of life that only city life, a little opium, or sex could ease. She thought about talking to Echo, but Echo had lost some patience with Ivy for not taking advice when she'd given it. Besides, there was really nothing Echo could do. Rader was ready early in the morning. Coldly, he handed her a letter as they drove away. Betts is dead. The letter was from a friend Betts had made in Europe, a Red Cross volunteer. Disease had swiftly taken her life. She got no glory, no young man, and no stories to return with. Betts, sweet Betts, so full of life, was just gone. Ivy crumpled the letter into her pocket, numb. The only emotion she could feel was fear. Rader was acting very withdrawn. Ivy had seen him angry, but as he spent time on his trips and reading his books, he had become icy, as if nothing could touch him. In a way, the calm was much more menacing. He had to know about Paul and the secret accounts, maybe even that they weren't married, but he said nothing. Well, maybe she didn't care if she did die, except for Paul. The trip started with a stench. Hordes of Mormon crickets were on the move, covering the roads, swarming everything in the path that didn't move. Live ones devouring crushed ones, the road a greasy, bloody red. Farmers were shoveling them into burn pits, and the smell was horrendous, like a scene from Dante's Inferno. They cleared the crickets and made it to Walker Lake, stopping to make camp. Hundreds of jewel-like dragonflies swarmed around, their wings clicking. Ivy and Rader searched for a spot that wasn't covered with mounds of shed dragonfly skins. With coffee on, Ivy took a walk around the lake, leaving Rader lounging in his canvas chair reading. The shores of the lake were surrounded by dead, gall-infested willows, draped with thousands of black, white, and yellow spiders. Tumbleweeds gathered under big red anthills, and the mountains, fading blue shadows. It was macabre and silent. Ivy was glad to be back at the fire. It seemed pure and clean. There was no moonlight, and the night passed. Venus rose a single brilliant gem reflected in the lake, and the water babies sang, and Ivy dreamed. She walked over to a willow looking at the shining threads like spun silver. The spiders weren't ugly black and yellow, but shimmering silver and opal. Ivy reached out to touch one, and they transformed into the scolding lips of women from West Virginia, a chorus of condemnation. And then they returned to their beautiful colors, together singing a song. It was simple and sad, but so lovely, the salt songs. They were in Paiute, but Ivy understood it not in words, but in pictures. She saw Indian grandfathers like Wakova sitting, telling the little ones stories. She saw the native people on their trails, walking through the seasons. Families working together, children growing up and getting married. She could feel the love of the people. Then she saw the children snatched away and put in a box. The singing stopped, and a horrible transformation began. One by one, the spiders became the faces of babies, dead babies, and they began to sing in thin, sickly little voices, "Jesus loves me, this I know." And Ivy backed away, falling down. She couldn't breathe. She forced herself to wake up and sat rocking by the fire the rest of the night. Sleep was very, very bad. Raider and Ivy both lived like the walking dead. Eat, sleep, work, take notes, take pictures, travel, and repeat. Days blurred together, the white blank sky, the vacant stare of a blind man's eye. Ivy's head pounded all the time, and there was no way she could steal a little opium without Raider noticing. It was hotter than she could ever remember. The only visible life were two crows, panting in the heat atop scattered white rock altars set against dead brown hills, scarred by gray trails. The heat was getting to Raider as well. He stopped at the mitzvah and checked in. At least at the hotel there was some life. As usual, there was drinking and storytelling going on. Ivy's head pounded as she heard a blur of stories all jumbled together. "Saw her last night with my own eyes." "No." "Yep, sure did. The lady in red." "Heard she haunts the place, killed by a jealous lover." Different voices. "Damn, Hank, even for an Indian, that's real ugly." "Yeah, Doc says she'll be okay, but that crazy Indian Henry pulled out all the squaw's nails for cheating on him." Ivy felt ill and dizzy. She just wanted to vomit and go lie down. Fear was a cold ball in her stomach. Drenched in sweat, she slept and didn't dream. Beatty was so hot, the horses' noses were bleeding. Scrounging around abandoned towns early one morning, they found the mummified remains of a cow. There was deathly silence as weighty as the heat. The only lively thing, a little scrap of fabric, flapping in the wind, and cooing of two sad doves. Ivy was feeling so lonely and alone, she took to feeding small pack rat at camp, just for a little companionship, while they were stopped for a couple days. It was shy at first, but became bolder as Ivy fed it cracker crumbs. Its bright little eyes were so cute as it stuffed its cheeks with crumbs. Raider came into the tent while she was feeding it and crushed it with his boot without a word. Ivy jumped up, sickened. "Why did you do that?" And the cold anger that had been seething began to boil up in Raider. He got in her face. "Don't you question me, girl. You just do what I tell you." And he forcibly took her. Her body yielded, but her mind was far away, and all she could think about was the smell of hot canvas. The record-breaking heat forced Raider to begin heading north, bypassing Pioche at Ely. He headed straight to Austin. The mule from Pioche with the flowered hat was tied up outside. Checking into the International Hotel around noon, Raider and Ivy ate an early supper in silence. Neither was tired enough for bed, so they went to the hotel lobby, where a small troupe of actors was presenting an afternoon variety show. A young couple sang the duet, "They Didn't Believe Me," from The Girl in Utah, followed by some blackface humor. Ivy's mood was lifting. This felt much more civilized. After a short intermission, a woman with a mane of red hair wearing an elaborate satin dressing gown took center stage. Her eyes were open in a catatonic state, rubbing her hands together over and over. Two voices from off stage painting the scene. Doctor, in this slumbery agitation, besides her walking, what have you heard her say? Servant, that, sir, I will not report. Lo, here comes Lady Macbeth. Observe, stand close. Lady Macbeth, yes, here's a spot. Out, damn spot, out, I say. Who would have thought the old man to have so much blood in him? And she practically clawed at her hands. Doctor, the heart is sorely charged. The actress playing Lady Macbeth wailed pitifully. Here's the smell of blood still, and all the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Oh, oh, oh. And the actress fell to the floor, extending the offending hand out to the audience, who cheered and whistled. As she watched, Ivy found herself wringing her hands, bile rising in her throat. She truly thought she was going over the brink of madness. The words continued after her. Out, damn spot! Out, I say! She couldn't hear anything else, and she covered her ears. Raider worried she was about to make a scene and rushed her outside. Ivy began reaching for her .22. The voice, the words, it had to stop. A bullet would stop them. Standing next to the hatted mule, Raider shook her. What is the matter with you? He shouted through gritted teeth. The dam inside Ivy's soul broke. All the pain, all the anger, all the truth spilled out in an ugly torrent, and Raider's face contorted with murderous fury. He raised his hand to strike her. Ivy finally had the gun and pointed it at his face. 2 long seconds passed, life in the balance, when the mule brayed. Ivy broke away and made a dash for the car. With no direction and no plan, she sped away, leaving Raider in the dust. Where could she hide? What could she do? Instinctively, she headed to high ground, slowly climbing into the mountains. She had to get a grip on herself and figure out what to do. A slide of tiny pebbles dribbling down the mountain, followed suddenly by a crashing boulder that swiped the car, pushing it to the edge of a 100-foot embankment. Parked out on a narrow ledge, she slowly got out, breathing in the fresh mountain air and looking down on the valley, framed by cool green pines. Maybe it would be better if she just stopped thinking. Like a gift from God, she suddenly saw a huge cave mouth, partially hidden by brush just up the road. Ivy started walking. For many, caves were dark, frightening places. To Ivy, they were a sanctuary, a quiet and safe place, like a child's blanket fort. It was a rare cave for Nevada, wet with limestone formations, decorated with caramel-colored pillars, delicate straws, and small green pools. Ivy wandered as far as the light would go, and each step invited her further until she couldn't see it all. An earthquake rumbled and shook the ground. Ivy ran for the entrance but didn't make it. Rocks from the ledge outside the cave collapsed, blocking the entrance. Now it was truly dark and silent. Ivy checked herself inside and out. She was all right for the moment, but the air would quickly become stale. Ivy began thinking about her lectures at school, stories of trapped miners, their skeletons becoming part of the rock. Ivy was tired, so very tired. Tired of running, tired of striving. She closed her eyes to rest just a little, and her life vividly replayed before her, good, bad, and horrible. A growing panic rose in Ivy that she was not ready to die. It was like trying to claw herself back from the edge of a cliff. She tried to sing the church songs from childhood, looking desperately for comfort, but one by one they became silent, falling like rejected paper dolls to the bottom of her soul. Buzzing filled her mind, becoming louder and louder. Like bats, the unupits flew in gathering, circles around Ivy, waiting. In the darkness, a brilliant white light, like the reflection off fresh snow, appeared. Ivy opened her eyes, and she could see the light. It sparkled with red and blue and green, like the opal, but these colors were alive and more vivid than any stone. A deep, thrumming sound like a heartbeat filled the cave and then faded. Then again, only louder. It was deep, past hearing, but Ivy could feel it vibrate through her. It was more than sound, it was a feeling, and deep liquid love enveloped her. She sat down, her back against a rock, just letting it flow around her like a river of warm honey. This was more than a sound. It was presence. It was a quiet, kind voice singing over her, inviting her to rest. Where she would permit it, she could feel pain leave, replaced with a sense of healing. She felt vulnerable and exposed, but when she quit fighting, there was deep peace. And 2 words became a name in the heartbeat. I am. I am. Her songs had left her, but this God that she had sung about as a child had not left her alone. When Ivy woke up, it was early morning, and the sun shining through a hole in the cave entrance that had appeared. She was completely free to go. A light breeze fluttered. Young green aspen leaves whispered in her spirit, Ivy, come to me. I will give you treasures of darkness, hidden riches of secret places, that you may know that I am love. A wide, low rainbow arced over the mountain like heaven's gate, filling every puddle with brilliant color. Ivy didn't completely understand what the thought meant, but she did feel alive again. A great weight lifted from her. What she did understand was this was an invitation to begin again. When she got to where she'd left the car, she found it rolled to the bottom of the cliff, and the road before her completely blocked. She started walking down the narrow track, singing. Paul had a long trip to Winnemucca. He could hardly wait to get there. It was a beautiful spring, the orchids in bloom. He couldn't believe that Toots would have him. Like Joe, Paul had really learned to say his prayers, and he was unbelievably grateful. En route, he hopped a small train, climbing the roof to ride with the Indians. Paying passengers and workers hunted small game out the windows. The little train was so slow they had time to get off, grab their trophy, and get back on before it got too far. On the roof, he reread Toots's letter, over and over. Paul, there's not a man in the West who hasn't got stuck up a blind canyon now and then. You can always see the far horizons in the West, except in the canyon lands. The shadows there get pretty deep. Been there myself a time or two. Love, Toots. Love. She'd used the word love. Paul couldn't believe it. She used the word love. She met him at the station in her bright yellow REO, and he treated her like royalty. They made arrangements to be married with a small dinner at the Martin to follow. Paul would finish his mining engineering degree by correspondence, picking up ranch work to pay his tuition. Toots would keep her position as postmistress until he graduated. The church was decorated with spring wildflowers. It was a fresh new start after so much darkness. Ivy made her way to a ranch house and hitched a ride in from there. She wasn't sure what lay ahead, but she tried to hold on to feeling alive again. Rader was sitting playing a hand of poker in the hotel when she walked in. Gone was the rage, gone was the fury. He was just calmly playing cards. He didn't even ask about the Ford. The .22 rested by his hand on the table. Their mail had caught up with them. Rader liked to keep up on all the news in Reno, so he had it forwarded whenever they were traveling. Paul had written them both a letter. Rader handed it to her. Dear Dad and Ivy, I just want to let you know that I got to Winnemucca safely. There's a girl here named Teresa who is the postmistress. I figure we will be married about the time you read this. Dad, I want to thank you for all your help. I will look after Dick and Iola for you when I get set up. Paul. Ivy's heart fell apart like shattered glass. Her newfound peace, her joy, her song, fled, replaced by wicked coldness. Hatred boiled up, and under her breath she muttered, If he won't have children by me, he won't have children by you. And as the last word spat out, unupits flew from Ivy's lips, carrying their curse, coiled in a tidy package of unforgiving poison. It made the thing speedy and strong, an arrow dipped in the blood of the enemy. Toots was dressed in simple white lawn with Irish lace accents. Holding hands with Paul, they repeated their vows to one another. At the moment she said, I do, the unupits entered Toots's ovaries, consuming every egg, like horrible little birds pecking the ground for food until it was barren. On their wedding night, Paul's seed found no resting place and never would. Mercy fled Ivy forever. Her heart had chosen its own reward. Rader had patiently waited, knowing it would all unravel. He had already made the arrangements for them to remarry quietly in another county to ensure their property would stay consolidated, their Reno appearances kept up. And Ivy agreed. For the first time in a very long time, they agreed about their future together and headed back to Reno, the first time officially as Dr. and Mrs. Rader Thompson. Years passed and they prospered. Real estate, stocks, cash. They even donated a beautiful stained glass window to the Methodist Church. But redemption wasn't for sale. Life was finally settled and normal. These were peaceful years, each keeping the peace, even if they couldn't make peace. One night, as Ivy was looking through her photos, she saw the ones that she had hand-tinted. She had never forgotten, but it just didn't seem important anymore. And as she looked at her photos, the tiny birds on the wallpaper began to move. Ivy could see them. They assembled themselves like a puzzle into a giant thunderbird. It flew at her, rending her heart to bits and eating the flesh. She watched, immobilized, until she died of a heart attack. Rader found her on the floor and cradled her in his arms. He had loved her. He always had. He couldn't imagine life without her. Unupits ate through his eyes, entering his brain as he held her. Madness engulfed his mind, and the unupits forced him down lonely, violent trails where he would never return. The news of Ivy's death came swiftly to Mr. Fenk at the club the following day as he was reading his paper. Fenk discreetly had Rader sign paperwork before Rader was declared incompetent by the courts and took charge of all their assets, caring for them as if they were his own. A few months later, Rader was buried with the Rosicrucians, Mr. Fenk arranging for a free burial for his good friend Rader, who had died with surprisingly few assets. Reno society was glad that Rader had such a good friend with him at the end. Fenk had even made a memorial contribution in Rader's name for the church. Granddad pushed himself away from the table. Marg, you sure got a good do on that pie. The little girl was startled. Granddad had stopped talking. Then what? Then what? She asked. The jello had quit jiggling. What happened next? Where did the bad things go? What happened to Uncle Paul? Granddad, tell the rest of the story, please. She pleaded as only 12-year-olds can. Granddad picked her up like a big old bear. Later, let's go watch the gliders at the airport. And with the promise of the visit to the airport, she forgot about the rest of the story for a while.